I think the key to me, whether you are a new entry to market or whether you're coming from, a more established business, is to truly understand your audience, iron out that value proposition and what's unique to you, and then stay true to your vision and mission as you go forward as well.
Hey folks, this is Joe Rule once again with the Bold Visions podcast, where I interview marketers and creatives about how to tell better stories about tech. Show notes and links for this episode can be found at racontouranimation.com/podcast. Today on the show I spoke with the one and only Red Drummond. She is a senior marketing manager at Wood Mackenzie, working in their power and renewables division. Red and I met when she was building out the marketing department at Amogy, which is, if you haven't heard of them, is a ammonia fuel cell company. A few years ago, Raconteur did some visualization of their technology, and it helped them kind of unite their team and their market around these images and understand what they were building. So it was fun to reconnect with her and chat more what she's been up to the last few years. And some of the highlights for me that we talked about was she shared about how important it is to have a deep understanding of your audience as a marketer, that B2B marketing doesn't necessarily have to be boring. One quote that she shared that from I think it was a former boss, she said, "Nobody has ever been bored into buying something," which cracked me up. Another thing she shares about is using data and creativity or kind of gut feelings to put together a complete marketing hypothesis or to make good decisions. So she likes to marry kind of that personal relational feeling with understanding an audience and then backing it up and also implementing data for testing and that kind of thing so that both work together. We talk about what she looks for and how she works with creative partners, and she also tells a fun anecdote about an unbreakable guitar. So be sure to check that out as well, which I found very interesting and I think clever. So thanks again for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy this dive into sustainability and creativity and marketing and all those kinds of things with the one and only Red Drummond. Hi, Red. Welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here and looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Super excited to be here with you.
It's my pleasure. And just to give listeners like a really brief intro, we met through a company that you worked at a couple years ago, I think, called Amogy, and you were doing some marketing stuff for them, or you were heading up the marketing or building the marketing department, right?
I joined Amogy. I was their first marketing person to go in-house, so I really helped them build the marketing department from the ground up. But yeah, we obviously worked with you on animations for the product, which is super exciting. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to chatting more about kind of your perspective in marketing and specifically around industrial stuff and sustainable energy and startups and all those those kinds of things. So the first question that I wanted to ask you, and just to kind of preface it, there's a lot of competition and noise in the sustainable energy space. And the energy industry as a whole it's more of a traditional market, and folks can be kind of skeptical of new bleeding edge technology for lots of different reasons. So from your experience, how can a new and relatively unknown sustainable energy brand really differentiate themselves from competitors in that kind of space and then start to build trust in a market that can be untrusting to new things?
Yeah, I think that is a hard question to kick up with, but a very good question as well. I think, you know, sustainable energy, the energy transition, it's a really, really big topic at the moment. And I think from a marketing perspective or a messaging perspective, everyone's, very concerned about making sure it's real and we don't want to be greenwashing with the messaging. I would say it's a little bit different depending on what type of company you are. For newer entries to market, there's obviously a big focus on awareness. So when I was with Amogy, for example, how we met, they were obviously a first entrant to market building ammonia in that space. So, very much a focus on one, getting the company name out there, but two, also this new technology and this new offering. So building awareness around that. And it's super important to create demand, which obviously involves like the orchestration of brand awareness and then building conversions through your funnel. I think the key to me, whether you are a new entry to market or whether you're coming from, a more established business, is to truly understand your audience, iron out that value proposition and what's unique to you, and then stay true to your vision and mission as you go forward as well. I think the key is, as marketers, we are, and creatives, we're storytellers, and great brands really build trust with their audience, but they build that trust as well because they have their unique and their a differentiated personality in the market.
What does that look like for you to learn your audience in a situation like that? As somebody who's never been inside of a marketing department in-house or anything like that, how do those conversations get started, and what does that look like to actually really start to learn about these people?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that I would normally focus on. One is, desk research, understanding what that product market fit is super important too. Once you understand the core audience, I think one thing that some marketers often forget is to sit in on some of those calls, to do your research with the actual people that you're trying to get in front of. If you have the opportunity, sit in on new prospect calls, learn from your sales team and what they're hearing in the market, and listen to them as well. And yeah, we have AI now. We can utilize AI once we've got some of those inputs to kind of build out personas and your ICPs and things like that.
Okay. Do you end up using AI quite a bit now compared to, I guess, whenever it came online? Like, is that a pretty central tool for building that strategy for you now?
I wouldn't say it's a central tool, but it definitely helps, speed things up, improves efficiencies and things like that. And you've still got to check everything that again, you definitely got to check everything that AI is doing at the moment. But I would say it definitely supports what we're doing. It helps with content creation. So yeah, it is a great tool to support in those efforts.
Yeah, a few episodes ago, I talked to somebody about there was specifically a content creator for a logistics company, Mary Hart, and she was talking about using AI to build ICPs and things like that and how helpful it was. And it has been, like, I use it as well for sure in our marketing stuff internally. But I think it's probably a less precise, or it can, as we all know, it can hallucinate things. So
Yeah, I'd 100% say you've always got to check your
yeah.
work. And if I'm being totally honest, I was probably a little late to the game in terms of it helping me with things like content, but it's a really, really good addition. And I love using it now.
Oh, no worries. For somebody that works in technology every single day, I tend to be more of a Luddite as well, because bleeding edge stuff can be kind of unreliable. So yeah, I prefer to stick with the tried and tested tools. Anything you wanted to add there about like differentiating from, because the sustainable energy space is quite hot right now. Is there anything that comes to mind there that a new company could do to stand out in the space?
Yeah, I think it's not just new brands as well. It's definitely existing brands that have to stand out too. If we take current company, for example, Wood Mackenzie, traditionally they were very focused on oil and gas or the oil and energy space, but they have transitioned into power, renewables, and other aspects of the energy transition. And we as a company, before I joined, they went through, a brand differentiation exercise to try and speak to that market as well. I think just goes back to what I was saying earlier. You have to be true to that vision and mission. But I think there's also a huge opportunity in the energy space and the B2B space as a whole to be a little bit more creative and don't be scared to test new things, whether it's being a little bit different and out there with your visuals or your messaging. At the end of the day, we're selling to people and people have to resonate with what you're saying too.
That's very well said. And I mean, it leads into the next thing that I wanted to ask about very, very well. And I agree. We do work primarily in the B2B space as well, and it does tend to lack in the creativity and like the boldness that might be in more consumer facing brands. And at least from my observations, at least part of that is because the technologies and the companies in that sort of B2B space are primarily driven by engineers and like more left brained folks, for lack of a better.
Sure, what you say about the left brain. I'm definitely one of them.
Oh, yes, but I would consider myself left brained as well, or at least I play on both sides of the aisle, but
Yeah, I think I'm actually aligned with you there.
not 100% like creative. But what advice would you have, or what things have worked for you to kind of push for those more daring or edgy or creative ideas in marketing that might get some odd glances from leadership?
Yeah, I think, like you said, the B2B space can be a little risk averse when it comes to creativity. Not all B2B, I would say. Maybe one of the marketing hills I would actually die on is B2B marketing does not have to be boring. Just because we're selling business to business. I actually worked with a creative director at my old agency, and he would probably die on this hill too. He was always saying everybody's creative in their own way. You just have to dig a little deeper sometimes, and nobody has ever been bored into buying a product, is what he would also say too.
I like
So
that.
I've kind of taken that on as I've moved in-house, and I really try to push creative to be a little different. And I think there's such a good opportunity for B2B companies to push the boat a little further, be a little bit different from the rest. There's so much noise, like I was saying before. So we really need to be a little out there. I'm sure there's that meme that goes around that I'm sure people have seen in terms of the Apple iPhone example of the difference of how Apple says it compared to how like a B2B marketer would try to sell the phone. But yeah, I think the other thing you mentioned, engineers and the left brains of the world, they like to see data as well. So show them how it's worked for others, show them how it's worked in the past. Start small with them, and prove to them how it can work and then adapt and grow from there. I actually had one client, one energy company that I worked with in the past that was super skeptical to doing anything. They were very traditional and they hadn't even really moved to that online marketing yet. So we did push them a little and tried to do a video campaign for them, but using their SME. So it was still, the content was very straight to the point. We managed to get that out there with them, and the results that they saw just from, like a 3 to 5 piece video campaign on LinkedIn, they saw results in terms of people hearing about them, people coming to them for demo inquiries. So that led to other things as well.
I've walked the floor at a lot of industrial trade shows, like B2B trade shows. And so I'm wondering if there's like a specific example, or maybe you have some insights into specifically the decision-making process with how an ICP in the space might be thinking, or their values or whatever. Where does it make sense to actually bring in the creativity? Because you had just mentioned as well that it's important to have that data up front in helping them make those decisions and build that trust and everything. Is there a specific example where doing something fun or unusual or whatever was effective, or where does that kind of fit into how you're interacting with customers?
Yeah, I think creative, it's always good to have them in the conversation from the beginning because they think differently to us. You know, they might see ideas that we might not, just from having a conversation in general about the company or product. There's one example that comes to mind when I talk about like creativity in B2B marketing, and I can't take credit for this, but I worked with a large steel company, and they did a campaign revolved around the world's first unbreakable guitar made from their materials.
Okay.
And yeah, they put this brand campaign together, and we were, as their agency from like a global kind of PR perspective, we supported them with rolling that out. And obviously, they have nothing to do with guitars, nothing to do with the music industry, but demonstrating their product in a different setting. The awareness, the recognition, the attention that they got on the show floor at all these conferences and trade shows was heads and tails different to previous, you know, where they hadn't had something to that level. Obviously, you know, we've got to think about budgets when we're thinking of what we can do creatively. But I think just that campaign, you know, they took it on a road show, they took the guitar around, they took it to concerts, and they proved that their material, because their USP and their value proposition was the strength of their materials. The proof in a separate concept, just it kind of stepped up, you know, those proof points in a slightly different way that people could resonate with on a day-to-day.
That is such a good example. Yeah, and just
I wish I could take credit for it.
well,
Yeah.
it's a great story regardless. And yeah, whoever came up with that idea,
Kudos.
yeah, kudos. I'm just thinking about the amount of brand recognition and the amount of exposure that got them through something
Yeah.
relatively simple.
And it opened the door to new conversations too with
Mm.
people that they might not have usually got in front of. Still the right people, because you obviously, back to my kind of point at the beginning, you want to make sure you're getting in front of the right audience. But it just amplified, you know, the numbers and who they got in front of a little bit faster and a little bit quicker, because people were talking about it and people wanted to come and check it out.
Yeah, and it's accessible. I think
Mm-hmm.
like a guitar is a universal enough thing. So this is I guess a little bit more granular. I think somewhere out in your LinkedIn or I don't know, in digging around to research for this, I noticed that you were mentioning being data driven in your approach quite a bit with how you approach marketing. So, can you talk a bit about how you kind of merge the, again, for lack of a better term, left brain and right brain, the data with the creativity or your gut instinct or the relationships that you might have with real prospects? How does that work?
Yeah. Well, data driven is definitely my buzzword. um, so I might cringe at how many times I say that on my LinkedIn profile. Maybe I should go through and edit that. um, but yeah, I am a huge fan of continued optimization when it comes to marketing, and I love showing business results from what marketing can do. But there are times when you don't have that data in front of you to inform decisions, or something's too new, or the data just might not be there. You know, I have to stop myself all the time and say, you know, let's just go for it, let's just try it. I think, on the other hand, if it is there, you can't ignore it, and you can't ignore the stats and analytics. If you're seeing messaging that isn't landing with your audience, you know,
Mm.
call it, try again. But I also think that's where A/B testing comes in as well. You know, we have these awesome opportunities where you can test messaging, you can test visuals, you can see what works. So I would say, yeah, don't ignore the data, but also don't be scared to just
Mm.
go out and try. I think marketing is probably one of those bigger industries where we continually have to learn new tricks of the trade, but also unlearn things of the past as well, because it's just moving on so quickly.
I really like that approach, first off. I guess I had never thought about data being a springboard, more or less, for creativity. It's like by being able to back up a creative idea with data through testing or whatever, It allows maybe creative ideas to be tested at a lower risk threshold and then prove them and then, go to a higher risk threshold.
Yeah, I think you make a great point there. Well, you're a lot less stuck in something, if you try it, things are out on social, you can change them within minutes now or other channels. So yeah, I think, try, and if it's not working, change it. That's the beauty of that. But I would probably also go back to that piece of, if you have that opportunity to, listen into like prospective customers and listen into calls and hear those pain points and those challenges and really speak to that, I think that's super crucial for what we do as marketers as well.
Yeah, agree. Just from experience in my own business, I've learned the vast majority of traction I've gotten is through real conversations and real relationships. It's like a three-dimensional understanding versus a two-dimensional one.
I think sometimes so often companies can be going off on one direction, and then you're listening to the pain points of customers and prospects, and you're like, they're not even asking for this like feature on our platform, Let's focus on this one first if it's going to have more impact, and then we can go back to what we thought was important.
Yeah, I kind of have a whole soapbox about that. Because particularly with early stage startups can be very driven that way. That people understandably get really excited about building a product, but without an understanding of who they're selling it to, who they're building it for, then there's really that disconnect. You mentioned unlearning things as a marketer. What sort of things do you have to unlearn as you kind of move forward into the future?
I just Everything's changing so fast now, we get new channels all the time, there's new tactics. I think what worked now in 2025 probably wasn't working in 2020, 5 years ago. Probably definitely not, because I'm pretty sure I've just said that loud and it was COVID. So we definitely had to adapt that year in terms of reaching people remotely, unlearning messaging, unlearning, channels, tactics, and making sure we're staying up with the trends and the tools, tech's advancing, trying new platforms and things like that as well.
So I work in animation, of course, the creative side of the marketing area. And those kinds of mediums like video and motion design and even things like interactivity and VR and fun experiences, they tend to be more widely adopted in B2C versus a B2B environment. What do you see as the value of those things in a B2B space? And is there particular places that you see them being particularly valuable in say, in building out a funnel?
So this might actually be one that we disagree on a little bit, because
Okay,
I
good.
do think that, I would say that that's not true for B2B as a whole. I think, yes, probably in the energy space it is a little true, but if you look at a lot of like the SaaS and the tech startups, the AI startups particularly, they incorporate a lot of like motion design and animation. I worked with one robotic warehousing logistics startup, that was doing drones for inventory control. Super cool product. Maybe one of the more cutting edge technologies that I've been able to market in my career, and we were always pushing the boundaries in terms of video content, animations, making sure people could almost experience these things and see it come to life rather than it being in statics.
Mm.
Um, but I do agree with you in the energy space. I think sometimes companies shy away from it, but I think it might be they shy away from it because they think it's like big budget material. I think sometimes, they automatically hear motion design and think, that lots of dollar signs. I'd be curious to hear from your side, like if people are working with smaller budgets, especially like some of these newer startups, what would you recommend for them?
Hmm. That's a good question. You're turning the tables. Well, I'd say two things. There's a huge range of budgets and of production quality for those kinds of things. You can do something for a few $1,000s. You can do something for $1 million. So, yeah, there are all kinds of options out there. But mostly for an early stage company or a smaller company, I would tell them to be sure that they have a really good structure around whatever content they're going to do, because the biggest issue that I've seen is that there seems to be a misconception that when you build a piece of content that it's going to generate traffic or provide marketing value on itself, but it needs tactics and strategy around it in order for it to be effective. And yeah, the days of being able to make a video and stick it on YouTube and have it do something for your business are gone. That alone, there needs to be something more around it. What are your thoughts and perspective on that?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And there's got to be strategy around doing something like that. I think a lot of the times people come to us as marketers and are like, I have this really great idea. And, they just want to throw some VR out there and not think about how it incorporates with the messaging and the strategy as a whole. So I think that's a really good point that you make. I think it goes back to some of the conversation we were having earlier too, though, in not being scared to be a little bit more out there and not being scared to try some of these things because, again, we're selling to people, and if they can, immerse themselves in an experience, or if a video brings something to life in a different way than a static image or a static ad would, then I think we have to incorporate that more. I think we're also seeing from, the data, we already know that video performs better, motion graphics perform better on a lot of channels too. So utilizing that is super important as well. I think the other thing I would maybe add too is create something once, create that big piece, and you don't just have to use it once. You can break, that chunky piece of work off into 8, 10 little snippets of videos. You can use it as content. You can turn it into graphics. Making sure you utilize it well is also key when you do something like that.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up, because that's point number 3 that I forgot, is to like fully leverage, fully utilize whatever you build. Actually,
Yeah.
motion design animation is a fantastic resource for that, particularly for products or industrial companies, because the basic asset of having a 3D rendering or a 3D animation of the product allows it to break out into, to be used for product pages, to be used for product photography, for short social media clips, for presentations, for keynotes, for all these things out of one core creative asset.
Something is simple. I know it's not simple when it's being made and there's a lot of work goes into it, but like an animated product video, especially for all these like new companies in the energy space, we're talking about complex technology, that's coming to market that people have never heard of before. So putting in that in a how-to video or a how-to animation really helps people wrap their heads around, how it's going to help them, how it's going to work. It talks about it, in everyday language that people understand too.
Yeah, that is, for what it's worth, you were talking about where does a smaller company start. That is generally a good place to start, as far as, in my experience, from as far as creative assets, that explainer or the introduction piece to start to build that trust.
Yeah. And I think as well, selling the vision of
Mm-hmm.
it too, how it can help them or how it's going to change the norm is that important piece too.
Did you deal with that a lot, or was that kind of part of your core storytelling for the different startups and tech companies, energy companies that you've worked with, to show the vision of the future?
I would say yes, but in both the more recent startups that I worked at, the robotic kind of software warehousing startup that I worked at, that was a change from the norm. Currently people count inventory by somebody walking up and down the aisles in a warehouse and, counting the pallets. We were bringing a new way, and there's obviously other people, in the space doing that now too. It's such a cool technology where drone would now go into warehouses, go up and down and do all of that for them. And it's not like they were like people don't want to do those jobs. It was, warehousing managers were really struggling to find people who would want to do that job. So it wasn't like the drone was replacing humans, but it was, helping them with a pain point. So I think, yes, it really helped in that perspective. And then at Amogy, for example, it was a little bit different because, like I said, it was a new fuel and also new technology that we were bringing to market, so that was more about that really building awareness and, helping people understand how it could be used as well.
I guess this is a perfect transition from that question. What do you see are the big challenges in marketing sustainable energy in the next 5 to 10 years? We're in this period of kind of radical transition right now, particularly around sustainable energy and that kind of thing with the new administration. A lot of things are changing in general, but particularly, I think, around energy. So, do you have a sentiment or kind of a read on the trajectory of where things might go, or anything you want to share about that for the next few years?
Yeah, I think you're right. There's definitely a lot of uncertainty right now. Power demand is greater than ever. Energy prices are super complex. And I think there's obviously a lot of focus on this, especially with the new administration and what's going to happen in this space. I think we're likely going to see some continued growth, especially in like the solar and the wind power generation. And obviously, we've got to increase energy storage capacity. But, there's also a lot of new technology and alternative technologies, alternative fuels coming to the market. So it'll be interesting to see, what really happens with those and which ones will come out on top. Well, shameless plug for Wood Mackenzie. We have some like really good reports and really good energy outlooks that provide that kind of like outlook into the next couple of years, but also can do pricing forecasts forward from that as well. I think as marketers, we really need to be able to adapt to the change and adapt to what's happening. And kind of going back to that piece that we were talking about at the start of the episode around continuing to learn new ways to do things, but also unlearning some of the things that we've learned and done in the past will be really helpful here as well.
Is there anything in particular there? You said marketers need to be kind of adapt and be flexible. Is there anything in particular that you would advise to creatives or marketers working in this space as to how they can adapt what they're doing and, come out on top?
Yeah, no, I think it comes back to the audience piece, making sure you're where your audience is and where they're consuming information and thinking about things a little bit differently and not being scared to be bold and creative and try new things. I think that's always key. But yeah, making sure you are where your audience is crucial.
And by that, you mean like channels, or just kind of listening better about where the conversations are happening and that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a good point. Definitely, I meant more on the channel side of things, making sure, yeah, you're pushing out messages that are on the channels that they're consuming that information. I think as marketers as well, we have to be in tune with what's happening in the industry too. If you're in that space, you don't have to know everything that's going on, but you need to be aware of what's going on to help with what you're working on too.
It really sounds like it goes back to that do more with less sentiment that's been dominant the last couple of years. Just basically spend the dollars where they're making the most impact, the most ROI.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's crucial, especially, people watch marketing budgets closely. We've got to make sure we are showing that ROI and that we're driving revenue. So just making sure you are adapting and optimizing as we go as well.
A couple of more fun questions I hope to wrap up here. Is there anything in particular that when you're working with a creative, whether in-house or an outside vendor, that you wish that they knew about your role? Or what are the angry emails that you wish you could have written at some point, or the problems you're dealing with as somebody heading up a marketing department?
So I think I would answer this very differently in my agency life versus my in-house life. I think agency life, I would say to the creatives, please bear with us. We're doing the best we can and trying to juggle the client demands with the creative, especially in the energy space. We're trying to work with the creatives to bring those like cool and fun ideas to life. And getting client pushback. So yeah, I think I would say bear with us. We are on your side. We just have to, balance the needs of the clients too. In-house, yeah, and I think actually this goes for all, but maybe another thing I would say is don't forget the goal of the brief. I think sometimes creatives get super excited just to be creative. And I love what creatives do. I wish I could be as creative too. But if it is for a demand generation campaign, make sure that whatever you're creating is going to work on the channels that it needs to. I've seen a lot of creatives, put big fun brand ideas out there, but they don't translate to, getting those call to actions for demo requests, for an example. So just remembering that. I love creatives though, and I think after saying that, I would much prefer to have to rein a creative director in than have to try and push them to be more out there.
Well, yeah, of course, that would make sense because that's kind of what you're hiring them for, is to push that boundary, depending on the situation, of course. What you're talking about though is everybody in that I talk to in the creative industry is well aware of what you're saying, I guess. Or they're aware that there's a trend towards this need that creatives can't just be creatives anymore. They need to have some marketing knowledge in order to differentiate themselves ultimately. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think, definitely understanding how the different channels work and how that, core creative message or look and feel translates down onto all the different assets, so to say, that you would need for a campaign.
Yeah, and then just I guess one last fun closing question. So you've worked on some pretty interesting stuff in your career, some pretty fascinating tech, bleeding edge stuff. If you could build a marketing campaign for a fictional technology, like a sci-fi technology, what would it be? And how would you go about selling this imaginary thing?
So I love to travel. So I think I love to see new countries. I'm trying to hit every state at the moment. So maybe it would be something to do with transportation, some kind of teleporting device that would get you from one place to another. How would I sell it? I feel like you could do a very cool influencer campaign with that. Maybe some pretty cool partnership. I think partnerships would be key for that. Maybe the Back to the Future movie, I think they'd be a great partnership to have. There's probably some really other good time travel movies that I'm not thinking of that would work pretty well with that. I think that would just be my dream, being able to be on the beach at the click of a button.
Yeah.
Does that count as sci-fi?
Oh, yeah, that's pretty that's pretty solidly sci-fi for sure. I don't think we're quite at teleportation yet.
Sadly not.
No.
I'm curious, what would yours be?
Oh, dang. The first book that comes into my head or with a bunch of sci-fi technology in it is Seven Eves by Neil Stevenson. The story is that the moon gets hit by some unknown space thing and it blows up and humanity has about 2 years to transfer all of civilization into orbit to preserve the future of humanity. There's a lot of cool technology in that book, so I would probably pick something from that. Swarm robots, that would be it. Yeah,
Yeah.
swarms of robots and
Cool.
what they can do in force, I guess.
That just made me think I'm watching a show called Paradise. Have you heard of it at the
No.
moment? I don't want to give too much away because there would definitely be spoilers, but they ultimately have essentially like a Apple Watch for everything. They scan it for the gym, they scan it to pay, which we can do already, but it keeps track of like absolutely everything in life, so you don't need bank cards and all that. That would be a pretty cool technology to have as well. I always forget my cards and stuff.
We're actually, I mean, that's almost reality
I get it.
right now. It reminds me of, I think there's a Black Mirror episode. It's kind of along those lines as well, maybe.
Yes, yeah, but people give you ratings.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
yeah,
Social media.
let's skip that part.
Yeah, that's definitely on the dystopian end. I don't know if Paradise doesn't sound like it's a
Yeah.
dystopian show.
On a day where I've had no sleep, I don't think I'd do very good.
No. So, yeah, and wrapping up here, where can people reach you if they want to get in touch? And you had mentioned, you had a specific direction that you were wanting to go and building your personal brand in the coming months or years. So, yeah, what are your goals there? Share with people what you're up to and how they can reach out to chat if they want to contact you.
Yeah, so I currently work with Wood Mackenzie, super cool company, supporting the energy transition. Always down to chat about new technology too. I love being in the startup space. So definitely open to helping with recommendations and, bouncing ideas off each other. I think it's always great to meet other marketers in the space. People can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest. So my profile is just, /Red Drummond. So that's the easiest way to reach me. And yeah, I'm happy to chat and make new connections.
Awesome. And I'll leave links to all that stuff in the show notes as well. So, well, thanks so much for coming on to chat, Red. I appreciate it. And
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
of
It
course,
was good.
yeah, I learned a lot, and yeah,
Me too.
it's a good time. All right. Hey, folks, thanks so much for tuning in. If you liked this episode, got value from it, or have any feedback, please leave a comment or send me a message. The best place to reach me is on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Joe Rule, or just search for Joe Rule. I'll pop up. I post clips there from the podcast and also talk about 3D animation production and storytelling for tech companies. You can also email me at howdy@racontouranimation.com. Please subscribe to be notified about new podcast episodes if that's your thing and you'd like to learn more about marketing, creativity, and tech storytelling. Until next time, ciao, ciao.